I would like to request everybody to settle down. And for the Wi-Fi, if you see 5G in the list of Wi-Fi, do not connect to that one. So don't use 5G. We're only at 3 and 4G. No, just kidding. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming here, distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends, to this forum of the Standing Committee on Finance. On behalf of the co-chair Mohamed Nasser and I would like to welcome you today. My name is Pieter Terpstra. I'm from the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I'm a SCF member since 2016, so this is my second forum. The last one was in Morocco for me. I'm really looking forward to being here. I am here in Songdo. I was here 5 years ago when the GCF was launched. We organized a session on private sector finance. 5 years later, I'm back again here, and the city has grown, and so has the fund. And it's really encouraging to see about 130 participants here today from all kinds of organizations, public, private, civil society, academia, think tanks, multilateral banks, national banks. You're all here to learn, to exchange experiences, to listen to each other. And this is also the idea of the forum of the SCF, is to bring outside expertise into the process and to learn and to facilitate the discussion on topics that concern us all. And this year it's on climate finance architecture, which is a very good timing, I think, to have this discussion. And I'm really looking forward to open and constructive talks and discussions in the coming days. And I would like to give the floor to Georg Bursting. Well, not the floor, because he's with us through a video connection, I understand, and I hope it works and he's up. And it must be very early for him, maybe. I don't know. Hello,
Good
Georg.
morning, friends, colleagues. Before I provide you with a few remarks this morning, let me first say how sorry I am not to be able to join you in Sogndal for the next couple of days. This year's SCF Forum is something that I have been looking forward to for quite a long time. And it was only in these last few days that it was clear that other commitments prohibited me from traveling from Oslo to Sogndal. On the other hand, I'm very happy to hear about the participation of so many experienced experts at this year's forum, and I'm really excited about the prospects of the next few days insofar as the input that you will be providing to the discussions. Before moving to the program, allow me to say a few words about the Standing Committee on Finance, particularly to those of you who are not familiar of the committee. The Standing Committee of Finance has the heavy task of advising the Conference of the Parties to the Climate Convention on all matters relating to the financial mechanism of the Convention. This is a tall order, but the tasks are also quite fairly defined, such as preparing draft guidance to the Global Environment Facility, to the Green Climate Fund, and guidance that the COP then later considers. We are also publishing the biannual assessment and overview of climate finance, which you will hear about later. And we are organizing the SCF Forum, like the one that we're having now, to facilitate in-depth exchange of views and information on climate finance themes. And we have done so since 2013, covering themes such as mobilizing finance and investment for climate action, adaptation finance, forest finance, financial instruments to address loss and damage, and also last year, climate resilient infrastructure. With this year's forum, the committee endeavors to go beyond just depicting the climate finance architecture, but rather to facilitate a discussion among the actors on how to make it work better. The climate finance architecture obviously is quite complex, involving so many actors and institutions and different activities and processes both at the international and national level. There needs to be a conversation on the role and contribution of different actors in this architecture and on how everyone can work together to improve the finance flows. The committee has worked hard to put together a program which will allow for a productive discussion on the climate finance architecture. And here I would in particular thank the SCF members Peter and Mo for their efforts during the last few months. Some of the objects with the program of the forum is to identify trends, developments and challenges under the climate finance architecture at the international and national level in order to improve climate finance flows from international to national level, to enhance collaboration between the climate convention funds and other actors, and to exchange experiences and to identify opportunities for further collaboration at the international and national level. The forum aims to facilitate a technical discussion among the stakeholders and practitioners on practical ways to enhance coherence and coordination of delivery of climate finance. The 2018 forum is the 6th of its kind since the committee's inception in 2012, and it has become one of the flagship activities of the committee. As I understand that Peter noted earlier, this room represents a part of a larger universe of climate finance practitioners, climate finance experts from developed and developing countries, climate funds within and outside the Climate Convention, multilateral and bilateral channels, national and subnational actors, NGOs, private sector, and climate think tanks. As most of you either work at the policy or at the product level, the committee finds it important that the strategic policy discussions match with the real on-the-ground experiences and examples, which will help to truly understand the status of the architecture and hopefully trigger bold ideas to make climate finance flows better. This forum is a highly interactive event, maybe except for the type of intervention that I'm providing to you now. But it provides many opportunities for participation in the plenaries and in the breakout sessions. I encourage you to actively engage in the next 2 days. I trust all of the esteemed speakers and discussion leaders will lead us through that path. And while I'm not in Songdo with you, I will follow the discussions through the video streams, and I look forward to doing so. Thank you very much. Good luck with the discussions. And I now have the honor to hand over the mic to my dear co-chair Beneditas to say a few words. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Georg, and thank you for being with us, although it's 2:30 in the morning. Ditas, do you stay sitting? Okay, do you have a mic?
I don't think I would need, I don't even usually need a mic, but I hope you will indulge me. I cannot get up the stairs without using the rest of the day for us to do it. Thank you very much, Georg. Actually, Georg is much more handsome than what you saw there. He's very good looking. And I don't know whether they did this at Oslo time. That would be very early in the morning. So friends and colleagues, I see very many familiar and friendly faces around the room. Welcome to the SCF Forum. This year's topic, you can read this, is Climate Finance Architecture. This topic is very timely because we are going into more and deeper implementation of all climate actions as we face more and more intense adverse effects of climate change and the need to really, each one of us, do the best we can in order to be able both to adapt, we need to adapt, and to reduce, control, limit the emissions that will, that actually will put us into the tipping point. This is the first time that the SCF will really have an overview of the climate finance architecture. Like Georg said, we try to be, the Standing Committee of Finance, we try to be very open, transparent, interactive. Everybody is an important stakeholder on climate finance. It's a huge world out there, and I see the main representatives, very many good representatives of climate finance. So, like Georg said, we should take this opportunity to really say what we think, what our experiences are at the local levels, at the international levels, the interaction between the international levels of financing and the domestic levels of financing. We have to take stock of where we are in terms of mobilizing and delivering. There are two things that the developing countries are asking for climate finance, something that is rather hard to achieve. And that is, we're looking at not only scaling up, but scaling up in a way that is predictable, accessible. Predictability and accessibility are the two things that we would like to see in climate finance. If you have to take action, climate action, you need predictable resources. And for many developing countries, especially those who are least or have the most constraints, we need to ensure equitable access to climate finance. That this is not on a pick and choose basis that you're going to give your climate finance. 3 years have passed since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, and all countries, but especially developing countries, are working hard to take more ambitious actions. We're looking at more ambitious actions, and therefore we are looking also at the scaling up of the support for these actions. And this will include, of course, our nationally determined contributions, which include our national adaptation plans. Now, it's okay. I'm sure you catch me if I fall over. And then we, during this forum, will have interactive discussions in groups. I'd like to invite you to be as open, as frank and sincere in your interventions in this group. We'd like to hear what you have to say. The Standing Committee on Finance, of course, is the one that is, and many members of the Standing Committee on Finance are here. They're the ones who are who have the mandate to assist the Conference of the Parties in order to do its climate finance for all developing countries. Now, we have also practitioners from the national and sub-regional levels. They will be able to provide you with their on-the-ground experiences. And I urge you, like Georg did, to make the most of this event. An open exchange of information among all of us will be the most effective way for us to find out what we would need in order to have the necessary resources for developing countries to be able to meet the challenges of climate change. Well, I will be very remiss in my duties if I do not, on behalf of the SCF, thank the government of the Republic of Korea. Through the Ministry of Strategy and Finance, we have the distinguished director with us for generously hosting this forum. Thank you, sir. And preparing a very nice venue. Of course, for those of us who are working with the Green Climate Fund since its inception, this is also a very familiar forum, but thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. And I would like also to thank the governments of Netherlands and Norway for their generous contributions, which allowed us to be able to get the participation that we need for this forum. So without further ado, I would like to hand the microphone back to Peter and Mohammed, who are the ones who have made this forum possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Titas, and it's really great that you're here, despite not being in best of health at this moment. I would like to invite Mr. Yoon Tae-sik, the Director General of the Development Finance Bureau at the Korean Ministry of Strategy and Finance, to also deliver his opening remarks. Mr. Yoon.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Korea and welcome to Songdo. Before I begin my speech, let me introduce myself first. My name is Tae-sik Yoon. I'm a Director General of Development Finance Bureau in the Ministry of Strategy and Finance. Actually, my responsibility is two in my bureau. One is all the MDB and IFI issues, including the GCF. GCF is one of my priority IFIs, which also include the ADB and World Bank. But among all the IFIs and MDBs, we put special priority on GCF because we are hosting the GCF headquarters in Songdo. And the second component of my responsibility is ODA loan provided to developing country to support the development of infrastructure in developing country. So my responsibility is highly related to the issues of this forum today. So it's quite a great honor to make a speech on this occasion. So I will start my speech. And Ms. Naditas Miller, co-chair of the Standing Committee on Finance, member of the SCF, and distinguished guest. This year's SCF forum is particularly meaningful as it is being held back-to-back with the board meeting of the GCF, both of which plays a pivotal role in climate finance. I hope that this will be a great occasion to raise the awareness of climate change issues in Korea and abroad, and create synergy in discussion on climate finance. I would like to thank the staff of the UNFCCC for their hard work in putting this forum together. That said, today's discussion on the architecture of climate finance is especially timely considering the growing gap in supply and demand of climate finance and the limitation of public resources in addressing climate change. Today, I would like to make 2 points that need to be considered in climate finance discussions from a somewhat practical point of view. They are promoting public-private partnership, PPP project for mobilization of climate finance. And second, increasing the value of climate finance for sustainable and innovative growth of developing countries. The first, I believe the climate finance should attract more private capital by promoting PPP project. To this end, institutional framework on PPP should be designed to not only provide sufficient incentives for private capital, but also to ensure a balanced division of labor between private and public sectors. In this context, it is very important for developing countries to build the institutional capacity to develop bankable projects and to properly distribute risk, cost, and benefit between private and public investors. At the same time, we need to also enhance the transparency and predictability of related regulations. In addition, when designing a country-specific PPP framework, it is also critical to learn from both the successful cases and trial and error of other countries. Korea has so far implemented 719 PPP projects worth over 100 billion US dollar since the introduction of the program in 1994. In the process, Korea has become one of the leading countries in PPP, but not without pain. For example, some PPP projects in Korea face harsh criticism from the public due to high user fees of PPP facilities and the generous minimum revenue guarantee scheme by the government that excessively benefited the private sector. Learning from this experience, Korea's priority in PPP policy is now to ensure sustainability by balancing the interests of all stakeholders. Second point I would like to make is the value for money of climate finance. It needs to be maximized when implementing climate change projects. To this end, it is essential to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of climate change projects by developing those with a high greenhouse gas reduction impact and strong climate adaptability. Furthermore, in the era of the fourth industrial revolution, climate change project can serve as a new growth engine to accelerate innovative and sustainable growth of developing countries. The key here is to develop climate change project coupled with advanced technology that can enhance productivity, create new jobs, and open doors to uncharted sectors. Indeed, innovative growth is also a key policy agenda of the Korean government, and accordingly, we are focusing on integrating the advanced technology in the area of climate change. The prime examples are development of smart cities and smart farms. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 1950s, in the aftermath of the Korean War, Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world with a GDP per capita of barely $70. But now, Korea recorded a GDP per capita of $30,000. Not to mention that Korea is the only country in the world to have transformed itself from an aid recipient to an aid donor country. In this process, Korean government spared no effort to preserve environment, especially in the area of reforestation. And another lesson we have learned in the process of development is the importance of ownership of a developing country. And also the capacity building of developing countries is quite important in the process of development. This unique position of Korea allows it to understand better the developing country than any other country. And it is the reason behind Korea's strong willingness to use its capacity to support developing countries respond to climate change. In this context, Korea made a voluntary contribution of $100 million to the GCF for its initial resource mobilization. And we also contributed $40 million to support readiness activities of developing countries, and have been working together with the GCF to host several annual seminars to support developing countries' capacity building. In addition to the GCF, Korea has contributing to climate funds, including JEF and GGGI, which Korea is also hosting in Seoul, and other MDBs. The representative examples of Korea's contribution to MDB's trust fund is maybe the Korea Green Growth Trust Fund, which is in World Bank. The fund is aimed to share Korea's green growth experience and knowledge and know-how with developing countries. Going forward, the Korean government is determined to continue our cooperation and provide our strong support to international communities' endeavor in the area of climate change. I hope that this forum serves as a useful platform to exchange ideas and information in climate change area. And I look forward to your insightful discussion in the coming 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tae-sik Yoon, and also, of course, our sincere thanks to the government of Korea for making this all possible in this great venue. We now have pre-recorded opening remarks from Ms. Espinosa, the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC Secretariat.
Ms. Bernarditas Müller and Mr. Georg Borstink, the co-chairs of the Standing Committee of Finance. Distinguished members of the Standing Committee of Finance, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this important forum on climate finance architecture. Thank you also to the government of Korea for hosting this forum. There is perhaps no better place to discuss climate finance architecture than South Korea, being home of the Green Climate Fund and the Global Green Growth Institute. We have come a long way in creating a climate finance architecture under the UNFCCC. The Global Environment Facility is now in its 7th replenishment cycle. The Adaptation Fund celebrated its 10-year anniversary last year, and the Green Climate Fund is now fully operational. These UNFCCC funds signal the will of countries to mobilize climate finance and scale up ambitious actions to fight against climate change. Furthermore, climate finance architecture extends beyond the convention, where numerous actors are working hard to scale up climate finance flows. At the international level, multilateral development banks, bilateral development agencies, and other climate funds are scaling up their climate finance to leverage greater amounts of capital to meet the Paris Agreement goals. At the national level, climate finance actors, local governments, and civil society alike are interacting with each other to mobilize domestic finance and implement climate change actions. On the private side of the architecture, there is a myriad of private sector actors managing trillions of dollars worth of assets and investments who should be further engaged to fully harness their potential. Achieving the Paris Agreement goals will require nothing less than the highest level of collaboration by all climate finance actors within and outside the UNFCCC. Only through collaboration can we ensure that climate finance flows from the international level down to the community level where it is most needed. If there is a bottleneck, we need to find out where the problem lies and together find ways to solve the issue. That's why this forum is so important. For the first time, we have convened representatives from all UNFCCC funds and other major climate finance institutions in one room with one question in mind. How can we work together to better improve climate finance flows from international to national level? The next 2 days of the forum provide a good opportunity to analyze each aspect of climate finance architecture, to look at the trends and developments of the architecture, to explore possible areas of collaboration within and outside of the UNFCCC, to scale up the climate finance flows, and to identify specific actions to be undertaken by countries, sectors, and institutions to scale up climate finance. I encourage you to take advantage of the time you have in Songdo. Do not let this forum be an end in itself. Take what you discuss here and start collaborating with your climate finance counterparts. Ladies and gentlemen, with the proper financing architecture in place, we can achieve the goals set out in the Paris Agreement. We urgently need this. We are already feeling the impacts of climate change throughout the world. Our time to do something about it is running short. So, your work here is very important. I urge you to be diligent in your discussions and to find the solutions we urgently need. I look forward to the positive outcomes of this forum. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much for that video. And now we come to a very important part of today, which is, I believe, innovation, because we have a poll everywhere poll. And I forgot to mention that the webcast will be broadcasted live on YouTube. So we also have people watching online, and they can participate also in the forum through the poll EV. And now I encourage you to take out your phone, iPad, any mobile connected device and log on to the internet. I once had a participant who actually used his phone while on the panel. Now it's actually allowed. So if you go to the website of pollev.com/UNFCCC, or you download the app on your phone or iPad, tablet, you can participate in the polling, and you can answer questions, and we can see them on the screen. So I have an example, I think. So the first question is, how do you feel? So I just arrived this morning by plane. My suit didn't arrive, but I'm here, and I still feel great. So I'll add great. So great, good. Nobody jet-lagged. Maybe some people were still, somebody was a bit late, jet lag, of course. Anyway, so you can see it's live, it's real time. We'll go to the next question. What did you have for breakfast? South Korean airline served a big breakfast, but I only had fruit, which is one of the answers, I know. There's always some technical difficulties. But anyway, so you can say, if you have the app, and at least on the website, you can see what you had for breakfast today. So I had the fruit, and I had a coffee. And if you all entered this, I think we can, and we can get the poll back up. Sorry. No. Otherwise, well, on the website it works well, I see. But anyway, this is the idea for the forum. And we also have the possibility to do a word cloud, which I think is also a good way to have interaction with you, to see what kind of ideas and issues, what are you thinking about, what are you struggling with, and we can project those on the words on the screen if this works. But otherwise, we'll probably have to look into it. I think the innovation went too fast, maybe. But hopefully during the sessions we will use this the poll everywhere, and we can have the results back up on the screen as the discussions are happening, and it will be a way to interact with you. And also, of course, you are free during the discussions to take the mic and ask questions. So during the couple of days, I'm looking forward to working with you. And I will go very briefly through the program. And I don't know if we can have those slides up, which is a conceptual framework that we had for the forum, which we worked off. This is very good visible, well visible. So we basically organized the forum around 5 sort of themes. One is the state of climate finance, UNFCCC funds and other actors, new climate finance instruments, national climate finance architecture, and national governance. And the different sessions, they will be organized around these blocks. And so if you, on the first block, which is on the state of climate finance, which is session 1 and 2, we will have a broad overview. It's really a scene setting, sort of, so what is the landscape of climate finance at this moment? What are trends? How are countries mobilizing finance? What is the private sector doing? And to set a broad umbrella sort of for the whole discussions in the coming days. Then on the second block will be more about the delivery by the different actors. And we'll focus on the UNFCCC funds and other actors, such as multilateral and bilateral institutions. And these will be sessions 3 and 5 that will focus specifically on this. And then on cluster 3, we will focus more on the new climate finance instruments, such as green bonds, but there are many other new developments, and so we'll show what is out there, how countries are able to use these new instruments in order to mobilize more money to engage new actors into climate finance. And this will be session 4 and 5. And the first 3 blocks, the state of the finance, the UNFCCC funds and others, and the climate finance, the new instruments, that is day 1. On the second day, which we go to another topic, which is the national climate finance architecture and national governance. Of course, we'll talk about that on the first day as well. But we think this is where things need to happen at the national level. So we need to spend a lot of time on how are national actors able to tap into these international finance flows, and how do they do that. So we'll look at the block number 4, which is session 6 and 7, how countries are generating domestic finance, how to integrate international finance flows with the domestic finance flows, what are different actors doing, how they're engaging with micro and small enterprises, for instance. And then the last session, we'll look at cluster 5, which is the national governance. We'll look at sort of the organization, the coordination between the different actors at national level, policies and new developments there. And that will be session 8 and 9. So we have a very dense, but hopefully well-structured discussion where we zoom in from the global down to the local. And as we go along, we hear from people's experiences, we exchange ideas, and we learn from each other. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to the coming 2 days. And with that, we will start with the first session. And I hand over the floor to Mr. Ayman Shasli to moderate the first session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, good morning, friends and colleagues. A pleasure to be here. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Ayman Shasli from Saudi Arabia, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. I had the pleasure of serving on the Standing Committee on Finance since inception, I should say, since 2012. Still serving on the committee. I'm also a member of the board of the Green Climate Fund and engaged in the negotiations of climate change. Pleasure to be here, pleasure to be your moderator for this session. I'd like to thank the government of Korea, the people of Korea for the warm hospitality. I'd like to thank Dites and Georg for their leadership of our committee. I'd like to thank Muhammad and Peter for organizing this forum, being the champions for it. And of course, we'd like to thank the Secretariat, our dream team of the finance team of the Secretariat for their excellent work throughout the years, serving us as members of the committee on delivering our mandate to the CAB on all the tasks that we are charged with. Without further ado, I would like to welcome you to the first session. Hopefully we can really make it interactive. We'll just deal with the technical glitch in a minute, but before that, we'll have 2 presentations, one by Muhammad and one by Peter, and this is going to be addressing the context of mobilization in the context of needs, and this is very close to developing countries' hearts, I should say. I'd like to invite Muhammad for the first presentation, which is an oversight, mobilization, and delivery of the function of climate finance architecture. Muhammad, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Ayman. Sure. Thank you so much. I don't know if this is working or not.
Not yet.
Is it working? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Well, this is very interesting. I have never been in this kind of interactive standing there, just like facing everybody without even having a podium or something, but there is always first time for things. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Mohammed Nasr. I'm from Egypt, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, member of the Standing Committee for almost a year now, engaged in the discussions and the negotiations of climate change since 2007, and advisor to Dr. Omar for the GCF. So I would say that from the process of climate change within the UNFCCC and its related institutions, I am kind of engaged in most of the stuff. I also would like to share what Ayman and others have mentioned at the beginning by thanking the governments of the Netherlands, Norway, and Korea for supporting this, and thanking my fellow SCF members in supporting Peter and myself in the preparation of the forum, and of course the Secretariat. Well, the aim of the first presentation is just to familiarize everybody with the scene, where we are now. There will be some numbers, of course, in the scale of billions, showing the climate finance flows from the international side, and I think Peter will be taking it from the national side. Yeah, I think it's working now. My presentation will cover three main elements, mainly the issues of the scale of finance, the sources of finance, the instruments, and the challenges that we are facing. But before going into the numbers and the big billions, it is important to mention why the Standing Committee of Finance was established. It was established as part of the Cancun outcomes, mainly to enhance the outreach and the communication between the process of negotiations of climate change and whatever is happening outside with the different stakeholders. And I'm very happy to see the diversity of participants here that are really either engaging on the climate change negotiations or the real players, be them on the ground as NGOs and private sector and local authorities, or be them from the MDBs or other financial institutions. In many cases, the negotiations or the discussions under the UNFCCC was seen as just government officials or negotiators engaging with each other without even knowing what's happening in the outer world. So the idea was to have an entity under the UNFCCC to provide outcomes that bridges the gap of information between what is happening inside and outside. And the flow of information will be like the two-way. We want to know what's happening in the real world, in the implementation, in the flows of finance, and also for all those stakeholders to know that climate change negotiations is not only about having decisions, but it is about real actions. So those decisions have implications. So that was the main aim of establishing the Standing Committee on Finance. Of course, it looks very much like the regular presentation that we see. What is the oversight? What is the COP doing? How the SCF is really helping the COP in fulfilling its functions? But I would rather go to the more important elements, which really deals with the numbers and the flows of finance. So the first thing is the main outreach products of the Standing Committee are the BA, biannual assessment of the climate finance, which gives a big, the real view of what is happening on the global scale, and this is the very famous onion diagram. The big circle outside, this is the flows of climate finance in general, everywhere. And then it goes from developed to developing countries. So you see the smaller circle, and then through it, then you have from public institutions, then the multilateral development banks, and then you have the multilateral climate funds, and then you have the UNFCCC funds. So you see where the funds are within the bigger context of the flows of climate finance. Of course, when we look at the smallest part of it, UNFCCC funds, those are the Green Climate Fund and the GEF, SCF, LDCF Adaptation Fund. And I think what we will be having maybe next year, the multilateral fund, as per the Kigali Amendment of the Montreal Protocol, it will be also helping the climate change action. So I don't know, I mean, it might be added in a next forum, but it is a fund that will be helping the climate change in general form. It does not fall under the UNFCCC, but it is an important fund that is also serving climate change. So, numbers, and this is the important part of it. This is, although the numbers are kind of old, we are covering 2013, 2014 as per the biannual assessment document that was out in 2016. But it is important that it gives us, because it gives us the sense of where things are. and that there is progress in the flows of climate finance from developed to developing countries and within the funds and on specific sectors. So this is what we have here. About 33% of the funding came from dedicated climate funds, mainly the GEF and the special funds. Those numbers are there before the GCF has started dispersing, so those numbers does not include the GCF. It also reflects that the current, it's important to highlight that the current GCF portfolio, just to put things in perspective, is 3.7 billion in climate finance. The other important element when we talk about the climate funds is the flows from investments and the MDBs. The figures, those figures were taken from the BA. They only covered 2013, 2014, but it was important for us to take things forward and highlight what's happening from 2015 onwards. And there you will see that MDBs finance have been increasing. From 2015, 23.4 billion. 2017, we have 32.9 billion, almost 33 billion funds. The numbers that we have here, you need to compare the MDB funding to the UNFCCC funding, from 32 billion to 2.4 billion, so almost like 10 times. Second point, which is also very important for us to understand, is the instruments. This funding in the scale of billions, how does it come to developing countries? Many people or many decision makers would think that climate finance is only the grant component of finance, but climate finance is much wider than that. Climate finance has all the instruments that you have from funding in general. So in climate finance, you have the instruments, you have the grants, you have the loans, you have concessional loans, you have all kinds of financial instruments that you think of are engaged in climate finance. But also, it is important to highlight that United Nations funds usually provide funds in the form of grants, except for the GCF. The rest of the funds, it is more on grant form. While the other multilateral funds, they have the mix of 53% grants and 47% loans. So it's almost like 50-50. And the bilateral institutions, according to the BA, their funding is, we can put in perspective, almost 49% in grant form, 2% in loans, 47% in concessional loans, and 2% in equities. While the MDBs, who have provided the bigger chunk of funding, if we look at their instruments, is 9% grants, 83% loans, 2% equity, and 6% other forms of instruments. Of course, the figures will be updated in the next BA, but just to give you a sense of what the current BA is looking at, and in the bigger portfolio of climate change finance, it would be put in the form of 43% grants, 43% loans, so it's almost the same, and 3% in guarantees, and 11% in equity. And this is a very important element that we need to highlight, because in many cases, be it in the negotiations or outside or even discussing with policymakers, they think that climate finance is just about grants. So you go there, get a grant to have whatever project that you want to implement in your country, which is not the case. Climate finance is a reflection of the real architecture of finance in general, but with a bigger concessionality, with a bigger component from loans, from grants, but it is not 100% loan, grants, and this is very important to understand. The last part of my presentation relates to very much to the work of the SCF and many of the work that people will be interested in, which is the challenges in data. Because data provides us with the guidance of how the flows of finance, be it investments, be it direct support, are going. Within the BA, the work of the BA, be it the last BA or the current BA, it was clear that climate finance data is a big challenge. First, because, of course, there is no clear understanding or clear agreement on what is climate finance as a definition. So the Standing Committee has provided like initial definition on highlighting what would climate finance be. But the problem has always been, and this relates a little bit more in the reporting process or in sharing with information and in the negotiations, then the quality of the data was not very accurate. The completeness of the data was not there. And even the data itself was a challenge, especially when we deal with the investments and the private sector. Because in many cases, data coming from private sector could be, this could be called development, or it could be called climate, or it could be called just an investment. So it was challenging, or still a challenge, a big challenge for us in the Standing Committee on Finance, and I think in general for all the people who are interested in climate finance to collect data, because first, you don't have enough sources. Second, you don't have enough reports. Third, you don't have clear methodology. Fourth, which is the most important, you don't have a clear definition on climate finance. So those all provide the perspective of, yes, we're talking about numbers. Yes, the numbers are in billions, but this accuracy is not there. And I'm not saying this from the negative point of view, that those numbers are bigger than reality, but maybe the reality is way much bigger than what we are capturing in our reports, simply because we don't yet have a common understanding of the term climate finance. But avoiding these challenges of data, it is important to highlight at the beginning, or setting the scene of this forum, is that climate finance is flowing, and it is of scale, and it comes from different sources, and it comes in different instruments. And this is the other important element. Having said that, I think Peter will take us from the international big numbers thing into more focus on the national part. Peter. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So that was only the international part. So now we'll go to the national. But I'll keep it brief, because one of the problems, though, well, it's not, maybe not a problem, but I think it's actually a good feature, is that at the national level, there are many different forms how climate finance is channeled. The BA doesn't only look at the international flows, it also looks at the trends at the national level. And I worked in Zambia. I don't know whether there's anybody here from Zambia, trying to map the flows of climate finance. And it was massively, I started off with like a PowerPoint, and you add one box and then an arrow and the next box. And before I knew it, I had a sheet that was this big with all kinds of arrows and block grants. So the BA doesn't look at all these countries, but it looks at trends. And it looks at the interactions between the different actors. What are developments? What has worked? What are good experiences? But also, what are the challenges in accessing finance, in channeling funds to the local level, and the interactions between the different actors at the national level. So we don't have any nice graphs of the national level, but we look at actors, the sources they use, the instruments that are being used, and how finance is being used. Now, if you look at the assessment and sort of the trends, then we see that at the national level, a lot of the finance is used for mitigation. From the figures, it's about 70%, but we do see that adaptation is increasing as well. And if you look at the subflows, it's about a quarter to 30% of adaptation, of finance going to adaptation, and it differs per fund or per donor or what kind of targets they have. But overall, you have a tendency towards more mitigation. Then the report also looks at the cost of the fund management, project development, and implementation. It's not easy to get those figures, but for some they are available. And then it goes into the effectiveness. And what we've seen in our assessment is that it really requires ownership, climate finance. And this is not only about me owning it, but the whole country. And I think this is also, this is new actually in the Paris Agreement. It's one of the objectives that all finance need to be channeled towards low greenhouse gas emission and climate resilient development. So it's not just the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Water doing an adaptation project. It is everybody. And what we've seen also is that if finance is dealt with the Ministry of Finance or planning, that you see that climate finance or climate is put at a higher level. Which I think is a good development, because then you see different ministries certainly engaging in climate and not just one single ministry. Another important factor, and this is related to this, is that we need to engage multiple stakeholders across governments. and particularly ministries of finance, as I mentioned, but also across whole of society. So this means private sector intermediaries like banks, national banks, but also civil society. What we also see in the BA, or what the assessment was, that there are low levels of capacity to design and develop projects and programs, and also to monitor projects and evaluate, which I think is a very important factor, because we need to learn and we need to build that into the further development. And so what we see is that countries have sometimes difficulty in accessing and following procedures of the different funds, which are different for the different funds and the different donors. And so these are things that can be ameliorated. And then we see, as I mentioned, the impact monitoring systems are being developed, and tagging systems to tag finance for climate throughout the budget. But these are starting to develop and not in a very mature state, which I think even in the Netherlands, I know we are struggling with properly identifying, so what are we spending on climate, what is the impact, and what does that deliver? But that was a very quick introduction and overview and scene setting for these for the coming 2 days. We're really looking forward to working with you, and I would like to give the floor back to Ayman. And I believe.
Thank you very much, Peter. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to thank both of you, Mohammed and Peter, for the very comprehensive presentations. Indeed, you laid out the architecture of finance. It's quite complex architecture. It involves multiple stakeholders. It faces challenges in defining what climate finance is. This is the greatest challenge of all times, I should say, for us engaged in climate finance, is to define what climate finance is. Perhaps it's wrong to try to define what climate finance is. Perhaps it's right. Still, we are unable to put our grips around what climate finance is. Is it a mix of development and climate? Is it climate with co-benefits of development? Is the development that has the co-benefits of climate? It's a major question. And this is what we get from the presentation, is that our ability to define what climate finance is, and also where the money is spent, mitigation versus adaptation. This is what the two presentations were trying to give us a picture about, how the financing is flowing and where is it going to. And the other question comes, well, will you be able to do mitigation without co-benefits of adaptation, or vice versa? Will you be able to do adaptation that has co-benefits of mitigation? That's another challenge to where we draw the line. Actually, we see this in the Green Climate Fund, that when we try to see how the financing is allocated, you see adaptation, mitigation, but then there is something called cross-cutting. So this is the link that we have between mitigation and adaptation. Without further ado, I hope you listened very carefully to the presentations, because now is going to be the juicy part of this morning's session, which is you'll be asked questions. And I hope you're ready to answer those questions. So please be prepared. I like to ask you the first question using the system. So I hope the poll system is ready. You're logged in? Were you all logged in? Yes? No? Are you ready for the question? Doesn't seem like it. No reaction. It's quite complex, I can tell you. But this is the example, perhaps. I'd like to ask you, based on what you heard from the presentations of Mohammed and Peter, we'll be using a word cloud that will be the most popular one that has been perhaps popped up by your answer. So the first question I'd like to ask you, and we'll give it a try. So we're ready? All right. Which key word describes the state of climate finance at the international level best? Evolving. Oh, they already did. No? Yes? Insufficient? Complex? See, it's not changing. So we have bias to evolving. Complex, okay, thank you very much. Yeah? All right. Are you all done with the first question? I want to freeze the poll. You're having problem? We still have some problems logging in. So I want to be fair with you, so we'll wait for a few minutes. Can we, could you try, please? Some people are unable to log in. But I see Complex is now really receiving the greatest, I guess, popularity here. Where is gender responsive? Guys, where is, come on. I mean, we struggled with the gender policy at the GCF, and I don't see it receiving any much attention here. Unfair, we don't want to use that word, unfair. Messy, it's really negative. We don't want to use that too, messy. Political, yes. It does require political will to mobilize climate finance. Ambitious, insufficient, definitely insufficient, will never be sufficient. I don't want to influence your opinion, so feel free, please, do not listen to me. Not that I'm trying to put words in, to influence your opinion. But I guess, yes, complex is the most popular word here. So I'd like to, are we all set? Can we comfortably say that we all participate in the poll? Yes? So thank you very much. This is the answer to the first question. So let's just keep that in mind. I'd like to ask you another question, please. So can we go to the next question? Which keyword describes the state of finance at the national level in developing countries best? Can we just give the system a little bit of a breather here? So please, we have these words. Again, the question is, which keyword describes the state of finance at the national level in developing countries best? Let's hear your opinion on this, your views. Oh, come on. What is we were already answered with complex. It's complex at the international, but it wouldn't be complex at the national. Inadequate, yeah, it's becoming now more popular. Mismatch, what is that? Well, mismatch, use tender to match, I guess you should. Fragmented. Really, inadequate. Well, that's a given. Let's have some other word. Insufficient. What is it still for? Undefined. Immature. Damn, what is immature for? Was it immature? I saw, huh? Disjointed. I don't know what that is. Unpredictable. There's a lot of things that are unpredictable in climate finance. Okay, I think we're heading into inadequate, shallow, unpredictable. Okay. Guys, you're really very active. Can you just cool down? You just take it easy, please. All right, I'm going to freeze now. All right, so we have a number of words that received really a great number of popularity here. Can you keep it on the screen, please? I have can you put them back, please? Shallow and inadequate. Shallow, disjointed, unknown, and inadequate. Well, unpredictable. It's quite really unclear. But yeah, these are quite common, I guess, opinions that we always hear from at the national level. I'd like to stop the poll here at this point. We have seen the first poll at the international level, which was the word complex. And on this one here, we have a number of reflections that it is unpredictable, inadequate, unknown, shallow, disjointed. I'd like to open the floor for interventions, if I may, based on the presentations and the answers that you just heard from the interaction of the audience. So the floor is open. Would anybody want to comment? I'd like to give you a chance, perhaps, to reflect on what you heard, or if you have a question for the presenters. Can I have the mic, please? Floor is open. Not allow the SCF members nor the GCF board members to speak at this point. So, anybody? Could you please say your name and your organization, please?
Yes. Good morning. My name is Kimberly Thomas. I'm from Temple University in Pennsylvania. And I have a question about the last the last slide from Peter's presentation. He mentioned impact monitoring systems being nascent, and I was curious to learn about how impact is being monitored for climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Mohammed and Peter to respond in a minute. Could I ask, take two questions, and then we'll try to answer them? One more question, please, or comment? Thank you for your question. It's a very good, important question. Another question, please, on this side. Well, the co-chairs of the SAF are not allowed to ask questions. I think Diane has a question. No? Mohammed, you cannot. No, sorry. Well, Philip there, please.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the presenters. I'm assuming that I'm going to get all these presentations electronically because I want to be able to absorb.
You will get, you'll get the presentation. It's recorded, by the way, on webcast, so it's archived. You can always go back to them if you will, but it's going to be made available to you as well.
Okay, so I'm not on. I didn't poll, so I am underrepresented. So
oh, okay. Apologies for that.
The interesting thing about climate finance always is the fact that the SCCF is looking at the global level. I'm more interested at the national, at the regional level. Is any attempt being made to break it down? Because I can identify with the regional and the national level, but when we start talking about the billions that's available at the global level, it becomes a little bit more difficult for me to massage this and to comment on it in the way that I would like to. And I would like to see that being presented at some point in time. Thank you.
Sure. We'll have Peter and Mohammed answer your question. Philip, thank you for the question. One more question, please. Please. Your name and organization, please.
Thank you. I'm Ibira Jibril from Benin, an Adaptation Fund board member. So I would thank really Mohammed and Peter for the excellent presentation. It is very informative for me. I'm in this process for a long time, and I'm so surprised to notice so far we don't have a clear definition of climate finance.
Oh, yes.
And I will know what is the causes and when we can have this definition, because at national level, sometimes it is difficult to classify what is the climate finance or what is not climate finance. And I think it will be very interesting to have this definition. We are inside Standing Committee Finance, and I think it will be very important to have this clear definition. It will be very useful for everybody, particularly for practitioners. And for Ministry of Finance also, because I heard this question every time the Minister of Finance said, what is climate finance? What is climate finance? So it's difficult to respond. It is, for me, very important to have this definition.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that question. Very challenging question, and it will have, Mohammed and Peter will try to answer those questions. Would like to start first, Mohammed or Peter, please? Please. Could you come up on the stage here, please?
Complement each other.
Yeah, please.
Okay, can I start first? Because the first question, the first key was related very much to the international finance. And I think responding to Jibril, why we don't have a definition of climate finance is simply because of all those elements. I mean, simply, it's a very simple answer is because climate finance, no, the first question, please, not this one. Q1, please. Because climate finance is complex. Oh, it's me.
It's because of us.
Yeah. Because climate finance is complex, and because sometimes it's vague. Sometimes it has political dimension. Sometimes it's very ambitious, so you have numbers that are exaggerated, or it is not really calculated in the correct way, so you have numbers that are much less. But the main thing, because it's very complex. That's why you don't have climate finance. Why is it complex? Because of several reasons, including the overlap, and I think that's the main element, and I don't know, Peter, is going to touch upon that, is the main thing that dealing with climate change is very much related now to development. I mean, be it adaptation or mitigation, whatever it is. So dealing with climate finance relates very much to the idea of how are you doing your development. And then if we take it backwards to the instruments which I had a presentation on, again, the complexity of climate finance and why can't we reach a definition of climate finance, because it covers several sectors. It has co-benefits, or it's directly related to development. Third, that it covers several instruments. So in our discussions, I mean, would someone consider loans that would be paid back as climate finance? If I'm a donor, or if I'm an MDB, or I just want, yes, because it goes in sectors and or projects that are very much related to climate. Maybe the recipient side will tell you, but I'm going to pay it back. So why I consider this as climate finance? It goes again to the perception that climate finance is only grants based, which is not the case anymore, because it has a lot to deal with development, and it has a lot to deal with banks, MDBs mainly. So once you have MDBs, banks and investors and private sector, then those institutions and those players, those stakeholders are not there for charity, they are there to make money also. So this complexity of things brings you to the why can't we have agreed definition. But the SCF has already provided a generic definition that would allow us try to capture the numbers. And if you allow me just very quickly to reflect on the elements that are there, yes, our participants choose the issue of complexity to describe the state of climate finance. Mainly this is because the complexity in accessing climate finance and understanding which institution is doing what, how can I get the funding from here and there. And so this is why complex was the one. Evolving, this is for sure, the climate finance is evolving. It's not only evolving in the scale, but also evolving in the sectors. And this is a very important thing, because at a certain point you'll have saturation in some of the sectors. Renewable energy, yes, it is expanding, but we need to shift from only renewable energy to sustainable transport, for example, or adaptation. That's why things are there. And insufficient, of course, it goes without saying. But the important element also to highlight here, and it's good that it's there, that it has a political dimension. And we have always to keep in mind that sometimes climate change has a political dimension. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Peter. Please, you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, I would like to go into the question of the definition as well, and then maybe I can answer the question on the monitoring systems. Because I think, well, I worked on climate finance for 3 years when I was at the World Resources Institute. When people ask me, what keeps you up at night? And I told them, like, what is climate finance? That's just what really keeps me up at night. Because it's very difficult to define, we know. But so we try to do it the other way around. So we go to countries and say, well, there are projects that are happening and people call it climate finance, so that must be climate finance, and see if we can come up back to a sort of a definition. But it's very, that again, that didn't lead to anything because everybody defines adaptation within its own context, within its own development plan, within its own development pathway. Like development or adaptation in the Netherlands will be different for adaptation in Nepal or for a small island state. So defining what, like in a sentence, what is adaptation is it's not that easy. And it's really, it is up to countries themselves to define what they feel is adaptation within their context for them. And that is also with the monitoring system. So we know, I mean, for mitigation, it's very, well, relatively simple. And what we see for monitoring systems is that greenhouse gas emissions is used as a sort of a proxy for effectiveness or implementation of finance. But for adaptation, those kind of developments, so what does it mean to build somebody's resilience? How do you define that? That has been proven to be very difficult. And so you see projects that are able to come up with their own metrics, but at the national level trying to define so many people are resilient or not, or are adapted or are safe I mean, that is still under development. And on the complexity of the finance system, yes, I was a program development officer for a couple of years, and trying to get money from donors is difficult. I know, and it's complex. But luckily we have programs that help countries with like the NDC partnership, like the GCF readiness, to cut through those complexities. It can be enhanced or made less complex even further. But I think we're on a good track. And then on the third question that I had is on the sort of the national and regional level climate finance flows. What I understand in this BA, we were looking at regional flows. But as I said also in my presentation, looking at national flows, I think that goes a little bit too far at this moment, at least for the SCF, because all the systems and all the solutions that countries find for so how to channel climate finance and how to get it to the people who actually need it is very different. It differs per country. And so we can learn, we can see trends, we can highlight what has worked well, but to make a sort of an assessment or a map of all countries, I think that not at this moment. But we will have more indications of where finance is flowing, which regions, and so that I think that was in the BA. But I don't know if there's anybody from the BA here.
Thank you very much, Peter. While you are on stage, are there any last few remarks you want to make before you sit and we end the session, please? Mohammed, Peter?
Go first.
No, I don't. I mean, I'm really looking forward to learning from countries' experiences in the coming days and see what kind of what solutions have you found for these complexities and our countries moving forward. So,
thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think we try to set the scene with numbers and information that we have. What we expect now in the coming 2 days from the participants, be them here or the ones online, is to help us try to really clarify some of the elements that we want to see, because Peter and myself, the report that the SCF collectively will issue will be dealing with this very important element of the flows of climate finance. Accessibility has always been a problem, but there are a lot of success stories that are there. Scale has always been questioned, but I think there is a lot of clarity or more clarity now. So what we expect from you guys in the coming day and a half is to help us and help the rest of the standing committee into identifying the main elements, like working on the main elements that we have put forward to you with some guiding questions. Of course, if you have extra elements to add, that will be more than welcome. And with the scene setting and with the questions on that we have in front of us, I think we'll be ready to go.
Thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, this brings us to the end of this first session. Again, I just want to say that let's not be, although as much as we try to define climate finance, let's not be bogged down on the complexity of it. I, for one, I have in the negotiation of Paris Agreement, I put in the text under definitions climate finance. But then, over the course of the negotiation, I took it out, accepted to be taken out, because it would have been really difficult for us to agree on it. Because, again, it is a complex sort of system that you cannot draw a clear line between what climate finance is versus zero, because they're interrelated. They're two sides to a coin. But it is for us, in order for us to be able to measure what climate finance and track it, you really need to define it. So sometimes we have to come to some operative definitions for it, because there is a political also definition for it. I'll just leave it there. Before I end the session, I'd like to draw your attention to the activities going forward. We will have 3 breakout groups. The first group will be on mobilizing international public finance, which is going to be held here at the plenary. The group will discuss the experiences in mobilizing international climate finance. It will also consider challenges and options in ensuring predictability and sustainability of climate finance. The icebreakers, the speakers will be for the session, actually. Ms. Satu Santala from Finland will present a case study on Finland's experience in mobilizing climate finance. And Ms. Lawrence Gonzalez from Mexico will facilitate the discussion. So this is the first breakout group. The second group will be the group will discuss the successes and challenges in reducing financial risks and leveraging public and private investment in developing countries. This will be held in breakout group number 1. It will also discuss gaps and best practices in policies and enable private investments in adaptation and mitigation projects and programs. Mr. Ignacio Arana will be presenting a case study on Uruguay's experience in unlocking private finance, and Mr. Sergei Pombo from the Green Climate Fund will facilitate the discussion. Group 3 on determining country needs and priorities will be held in breakout group number 2. The group will discuss insights by developing countries in preparing national climate finance strategies and financing options to implement these strategies, and how the strategies are being matched with international and domestic finance. And also it will discuss how country ownership is ensured in implementation of projects and programs. Mr. Namoho from African Development Bank will present a case study, and the discussion will be facilitated by Mr. Raju Bandecheri from Nepal. With this, I would say good luck for the rest of your day, and we'll see you when the breakout groups end. We'll come back to the plenary here for just a recap for the day, and we look forward to having an interactive, energetic discussions. Thank you very much. You can go anywhere. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. All right, 15 minutes coffee break, and then we resume for the breakout groups, please.
Hello. Ah. Hello, everyone. Hello. Ah. 네, 아까 써보려고 해서 그래서 한번 써보려고 했는데 정도 안 되고 네. 그러면서 그냥 돌아다니면서 제가 말해야 될 것 같아요. 아니면은 이렇게 클래스처럼 없어요. 그냥 내 말로. Sorry, but yeah, sorry to interrupting you guys, but the breakout group discussion will start pretty soon. So yeah. Sure. The meeting room's in now. Sorry to interrupting you guys all. The breakout group discussion will start pretty soon, so please go to the meeting room downstairs. Sorry, the breakout group discussion will start pretty soon, so please. Sorry to interrupt you all. The breakout group discussion will start pretty soon, so please go to the meeting rooms downstairs. Yeah, downstairs. Yeah. So sorry to interrupting you guys, but the breakout discussion, the group discussion will start pretty soon downstairs. And one is here, yeah? The one? No, the first one, the plenary. The plenary. Yeah, but there's one breakout in the plenary. Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good. Sorry to, yeah. 세션 어제 11시부터 해야 되는데 네. 보니까 원래 이게 지금 시작해야 되는 건데 이게 이제 시작한 거거든요. 그래서 이게 언제 끝날지 모르겠는데 10시 15분부터 11시 반이니까 이 시간은 말이지 말고 그냥 빨리 미팅룸으로 가시라고 하시면 될 것 같아요. Sorry to interrupt you all, but the breakout discussion will start pretty soon, so yeah. Sorry to interrupting you guys, but the breakout discussion will start pretty soon, so please go to the meeting room or plenary.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this breakout group with us. I am Lorena Gonzalez, and I'm going to be leading the discussion that you're going to have today. So I'm not going to be doing much more of a speaking after our very brief introduction and the case study that we're going to have for thrilling the conversation as well. Just a couple of notes on what's going on. We will have a 15 minutes adjustment of time because we're starting a little bit late. We would expect from you a very interactive participation, so you can ask questions, call for someone of the secretariat if you need anything, and we will be taking notes over there in the whiteboard once the interaction starts. So without any further ado, we will start with our case study presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and a good morning from my side too. My name is Satu Santala. I'm Director General for Development Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Finland, and I'm also a GCF board member. That's why I happen to be in town, and very happy to join your forum for the first time. I'm going to be going through a specific example of something that Finland has been innovating on in the past couple of years, and then hope that that will be interesting for you. So this is a blended finance fund that Finland and IFC have put together last year. This comes as an innovation in terms of the source of funds. As those of you who work in government know that government resources are always going to be finite, and you always struggle how are you going to address that issue? How do you get more funds flowing? We have, during this government term, 2015 to 2019, for the first time, something called development investments at our disposal. So that means that these are funds that are returnable with an expected, even if modest, interest expectation, and we can allocate those to different development-relevant causes. And during this 4-year term, we can use up to about €500 million. So it's not an insignificant number or amount of money for a small country like Finland. And we are committed to allocating a significant part of this pot to climate finance. The fund that I'm going to be talking now about is a blended finance program with the IFC. Which is a blend of blending our concessional finance with commercial funds. Those commercial funds are coming partly from IFC's own resources and then partly from the private sector. And the aim is to mitigate early entrant costs and project risks. This is also one of the aims is to balance risk and reward profiles and demonstrate business cases. And pioneer investments and create markets for low-carbon solutions. So really to go the extra mile, not just fund any kind of climate investments, but really trying to push the envelope further. We want to crowd in private sector finance for climate actions with our money and to maximize financing for development and also climate finance. This fund has been set up last year, end of last year, and we're investing 114 million into this. As I said, it's a returnable development investment. It's not at commercial terms, so it's still more concessional than IFC's other type of financing. And we wanted to be very ambitious with the objectives of it and also have high-risk features. So we are ready to finance early-stage, high-risk projects, which means in, for example, riskier countries or technologies that are not fully tested out yet, and in sort of really trying to find investments that can create markets. The objective is also to mobilize private financing with our funds. So we know now that we will at least have a leverage of 1:1 to 5 or more, meaning €1 of ours will be matched by IFC's equal amount at least, and then about 5 times or more of other private financing. And we think this is quite a good leverage. The investment period is 5 years, so our funds will be deployed over 5 years, and the entire fund will be it has a lifetime of 25 years. So the purpose of the fund is to primarily promote climatic effects, so have climate impact, but also at the same time to have other development impacts, for example, creating jobs, increasing tax revenue for the country, and so on. The funding instruments are multiple. We can do equity, senior debt, mezzanine debt, guarantees, and so on for companies operating in developing countries. And these tools enable us to lower the risk for these projects and make sure that there is maximum impact. We have decided together with IFC certain focus sectors for mitigation, in particular renewable energy, energy efficiency, agriculture, forestry and land use, water and wastewater and transport. Adaptation, we do meteorology, this word kills me, meteorology, water and sanitation, food security, sustainable forestry. So also here you see that we're trying to go beyond only doing renewable energy or the sort of easy ones, but really trying to see if we can push an international institution like IFC together with us to take risk and do some of these more difficult areas. This is demand-driven, so we look for projects that are ready to be financed. And an example of a project that is close to being decided in the pipeline is a very early stage and potentially transformative multi-country wind project in Africa. This project has a lot of potential for creating wind markets in countries where they do not exist at this moment. Of course, we don't know if it's going to succeed, so we accept to take that risk. But we think that it has a good potential. And also, Finland and IFC are at the moment planning or preparing for a project development component to help this fund to make sure that we have a good pipeline of projects coming through, and in particular to be able to work with these very early stage pilots. This will be grant financed by us. This is just to sort of summarize what's in it for the different partners. For us, we really wanted to make sure that we create climate impact with an innovative tool from our side of using these investment type funds rather than our budget expenditure. And we wanted to see if we can really leverage and mobilize private funding to be doing these impacts that we wanted to achieve. For IFC, they're very interested to work with us because this helps them in their wish to create markets for climate-relevant areas in the more difficult markets. And they know that in order for these projects to work, de-risking is really important, and they struggle to engage with early-stage projects. Typically, many of these international financiers enter projects when they are already mature and ready and less risky. And for private sector, obviously, they're looking for business opportunities. There are lots of business opportunities in climate finance, but often they tend to be risky, and the private sector has that consideration to make. So this type of financing pushes them or enables them to be doing more of it. And this where all these interests meet is to create climate impact, to create markets for the climate relevant activities, and also at the same time, obviously, we get economic development and other kinds of development impacts. So this is all I wanted to say at this moment. We're really excited about this because this is something completely new for us. We've only been doing grant type of financing until now, and we're learning, but we think this has a lot of potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Satu, very much for your presentation. I would like to ask you if, of course, a round of claps first. And I would like to ask our participants in this breakout group if there are immediate questions that you would like to ask about the presentation. Yes, please. Can someone help us with a microphone? Thank you. If you can please introduce yourself and then pose your question.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Liane Schalatek. I'm with the Heinrich Böll Stiftung in North America. And Satu, thank you very much for the presentation. You mentioned that it's basically new territory for Finland going into that. And you indicated that the fund that you're proposing or that you're setting up now is going very much into high-risk investments, which means I'm assuming that the government of Finland is prepared to lose a significant part of that investment. Obviously, the idea is going into very much so unproven technologies and approaches, and that's very commendable to try to engage with actors very differently. But obviously there is no guaranteed return. And so I'm just wondering, what your willingness is. How much of it are you willing to actually lose in the process?
Are there any other questions? Yes, here, Ditas, over here, please.
Thank you very much, Lorena, and thank you very much, Satu, for that interesting presentation. I have a lot of questions, but the first thing I think it is maybe very clear that there is a difference between legal obligations under the Convention on the provision of financial resources and what we call climate financing, such as you have put in there, because Finland, of course, also has reporting obligations on the kind of financing that they provide for climate change. In fact, we have tables and so forth, national communications that show the. Are they one the same, or is this different from the fulfillment of obligations? That's one. The second question is, and I've always asked this, because they say it's demand-driven. How much interaction, or perhaps how are you determining demand-driven? Is there an exchange of information to find out exactly from those stakeholders what they think they need, or does it come from the outside? Because most of what I saw here are actually market opportunities, investment opportunities. The last question is, because it flows from if it's market and investment opportunities, how much would it be for adaptation? Because adaptation is, projects are usually non-revenue generating, but they do have a lot of technology needs to begin with. So it would seem that this financing would be focused mainly on those revenue-generating thing, and perhaps subsidiary to that is who determines what is transformative? How do you determine transformative in designing the Green Climate Fund? And Lorena knows this very well. We have tried to avoid the term transformational change or something like that. But first of all, it's a tautology. And then secondly is who, it's judgmental in nature. How do you determine that? It is, how does it transform, and does it necessarily transform? I have a good friend here who will be giving a presentation on that, which I hope that I will be able to join. And thank you very much, Satu. Thank you very much for your...
Thank you, Ditas. There is another question, and I think after this one, we can answer the questions posed already.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Omar Larini. I'm from Egypt. Hi, Satu. Thank you for the presentation. I was always looking for an opportunity to hear about the experience of developed countries and how they address their responsibilities under the climate change regime. I haven't heard this, of course, because you're talking about ODA and different kind of management of your ODA, And what I understood is that you have some sort of trust fund established, or IFC, according to certain conditions. And what was not clear in your presentation, whether you are, because you talked about markets, and whenever I hear the word markets, I get nervous when we are talking about obligations under the convention. Are you promoting business opportunities for your companies in developing countries? Are you testing the adaptability and potentially the adoption of new technologies that would indeed constitute a paradigm shift? I like the idea of the wind farms in a group of African countries, and you're very cautious in saying that you're not 100% sure whether this will be successful or not. I think we need to encourage projects like these, but not on a market basis. It's true, any new project in a developing country will create jobs, this is for sure. But creation of jobs is not only in developing countries, also in developed countries, and the ratio is quite high. Salaries are different, procurement is different, etc., etc. So what's new, and what you are doing? And I know the record of your country is very bright record in ODA. I welcome more of that. But what can we learn if you are targeting certain markets and you have justification of this and promoting your own business companies? I'm assuming this. I'm not saying that you said that, because you didn't say anything about who will implement the 500 million euro plus an equivalent amount from IFC, and hopefully much more from the private sector. And you did not elaborate what kind of private sector we're talking about. Your private sector, the multilateral development banks, etc. I would appreciate clarification of this. I wish we had this opportunity at the board, where both of us are members, because these are challenging questions, and I think we would like to learn from your experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Satu, very interesting questions, and a very, very broad spectrum of issues were raised already. So the floor is yours again.
Thank you. I will answer to my best ability. Leanne's question, whether and how much we're prepared to lose. We are prepared to lose since we are taking risk. We understand that when you take risk, sometimes you fail. It seems that in similar, well, our facility is more risk-taking than, for example, one that Canada has done previously that is of similar nature. So we can expect that we may be losing more. On the other hand, usually when there is high risk, there's also expectation of higher rewards. So we do think that in the pool of our investments, we will have failures, but then we will have successes as well, and they might even out each other. So obviously, we don't really exactly know, but we understand what we're going into, and we think this is the right thing to do for us, because we really wanted to make sure that that our government money is being used not just for any kind of climate finance, but really pushing the boundary and creating those kinds of openings where then later on they will work without government subsidies, and then that will be new opportunities. Bernadita's, thank you for those comments. They were some of them a little difficult for me to address, but I'll do my best. And I think some of it also goes to Omar's comments. you will note that I do not come from the long tradition of climate negotiators, and I use language and words that are relevant to my context, which is development finance and climate finance in that context. So I did not mean to make any comments that are related to the more, for example, the use of the word transformative was not meant to be judgmental in that way or anything of that sort, but more to describe that it's not, that we are not interested in financing projects that would happen anyways, or that that are just making a small impact, but we really look for places and projects that could have an impact in a wider scale. And such as the example that I mentioned of doing wind energy in countries where basically this does not exist yet. We know that in most countries wind energy becomes profitable and can be done by the private sector. We don't need to waste government public money into these kinds of things later on, but in the beginning you need to see if that could open up with some subsidy, and that's what we're trying to do. Yes, so I did not want to, by presenting this case, I did not want to say that we're not doing the regular kind of climate finance or the one, for example, financing a green climate fund and other things. This is just a new innovation that we've entered into the soup, and that's why I wanted to talk about this now, because this is a little different. And of course, we always follow our reporting obligations and all of it. So, and we collect a lot of information from various kinds of things that we do, bilateral, multilateral, and so on. So this is not to confuse that in any way. So in this context, so I want to be absolutely clear. So this funding is used for private sector funding. So we have other channels to do public sector, to do civil society, all kinds of other things, but this is specifically for private sector activities. And because we all know that climate change challenges will not be solved with public resources only. So this is a way of trying to push the private financing to go towards climate. That in that context also, demand-driven means that it is demand-driven by private sector actors. And I'm entering to answer already Omar's question on what kind of private sector are we talking about. We're not talking about Finnish private sector here. This is completely untied. It has nothing to do with our companies. This is for private sector actors that are interested to work in extremely difficult markets. They may be local private sector, they may be international private sector, but it is, the definition would be of whether you're interested to take the risk and work in, for example, a fragile country looking at opportunities that have climate benefits. So the demand comes from private sector actors, and it is IFC that has that interaction with various companies and are trying to scope where these types of investments could be coming in. And adaptation and mitigation. Yes, we also we really wanted to make sure that this program document includes adaptation, not only mitigation. But I think it's realistic to say that mainly private sector projects have so far been in the space of mitigation. We're trying to push it. We're trying to look for projects in the adaptation space, but it's going to be more difficult. We hope that we will be able to find them, and we've identified certain sectors where there's potential, but it's going to be difficult. And that's why, for example, we look to the Green Climate Fund to be doing enough adaptation, because we think that we have to find, in particular, grant-based tools to do adaptation, because that requires a lot of grant. And then to Omar's questions, Yes, so I was asked to do a case study presentation. I did it on a very specific case, so I'm not talking about more broadly what developed countries are doing. So, so I'm sorry if I did not meet your expectation on that one. And then, yes, so what is new? What is new in the way of the source of funds? So we have been, for the first time, able to include in our government budget a development investment. That means that we are able to on top of our ODA budget, to have this type of financing, and that we think it's a good innovation because we're able to top up what we're doing. So this is not away from anything else. This is a top up, and because it's returnable, it's a little easier for the government to make these decisions, and then we'll be able to have those impacts. And then in terms of what is new as an innovation to the fund itself, it is really this the high risk features. So we are not just financing any kind of project, but we are looking for the poorest countries, the more nascent fields that can be where we can see progress going forward. So that's yeah. I hope I was able to answer at least a majority of the questions and comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Satu, and I would ask for another round of applause for our presenter. Thank you very much. And I think this presents us with some of the challenges that were mentioned in the opening ceremony and some of the interventions that we've been listening to throughout the morning. Because this reflects on the nature of the process that we've been having for the past 20 or so years, and we have Ditas here with us. She can tell us all the details about the process and the transition and the challenges that we're facing to actually embark ourselves in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And in terms of what we've been listening, and we all know about the challenges, we would like to hear specifically in this session about the gaps that you've been identifying in the provision of climate finance. As you know, in the context of the negotiation, language is very important, and there is a difference between the resources that are provided for the implementation of the convention and the Paris Agreement, and also we have this challenge of mobilizing broader financial resources to trigger additional climate action that is effective, that is efficient, that contributes to the objectives that we all are pursuing in the global community. So in terms of that, what are the gaps that all of you have been identifying from your experiences, and what are also the lessons learned that you've identified also to enhance the predictability and also to enhance the sustainability of the resources, because that is the challenge. What we are facing now has a much broader scope than the one that we had before, because now we have this article, this provision in the Paris Agreement, right, Ditas? Which is Article 2.1c, and that triggered a global challenge. That is, how are we going to make possible that all financial flows globally, universally, are consistent with low-carbon societies in a resilient world? And that is a challenge that we've never faced before. So we would like to open the floor now to listen to some of the reactions to these two questions. So on the one hand, the gaps in the provision of finance. On the other hand, some of the lessons learned to actually enhance the predictability and the sustainability of the climate finance that is flowing around. So the floor is open. Don't be shy. We know you know about these things. Ditas, please. Can we have a mic here? Thank you.
just to break the ice, why do you speak of predictability and accessibility? Because we have identified, and you are quite right, and you have been with me through most of these years that we have been dealing with climate finance. Because this is the big challenge that we have for developing countries. And that is the difficulty of, and that is the difference between the public obligation and how the private sector can be mobilized. Frankly speaking, Lorena, throughout all these years, given the fact that we are always, most of the financing for climate change has come from what we call voluntary sources, and these are multilateral development banks, these are regional development banks, bilateral. They are outside. We consider that outside of the framework of the financial mechanism. We have only two operating entities of the financial mechanism that have these obligations, and that you mentioned one is the Global Environment Facility, and the other is the Green Climate Fund. And what we are trying to do is to prevent the Green Climate Fund from, not fulfilling also its raison d'être. The reason it is there is because they are the financial mechanism through which the obligations to provide financial resources would flow. The difficulty is predictability. If you are looking at voluntary sources, it's not predictable. It might be, it's useless. It's not useless, but you cannot do long-term climate action, as you know, is long-term. If you don't know what kind of resources are available to you, then how can you make long-term planning? I always tell my friends, if you don't know how much you're receiving monthly as a salary, you can't even plan to buy a house or even a pair of shoes. You have to know. Unfortunately, these voluntary sources are not predictable. You cannot predict from one day to the next what you're going to get. Accessibility is another one, because they keep on telling us, oh, there's a mountain of gold, the private sector out there. How do I access it? What are the conditions for access? These are the kind of challenges that we are looking at when we look at climate change financing. And once again, I want to emphasize, there is a difference, and we recognize it in the convention, between those voluntary sources and through which most of the financing, by the way, on climate change has done. Now, if you're talking about voluntary sources, especially if you're talking about return on investments or profitability of investment, and even if you're talking about co-financing, actually what you're saying is that most of the time it's the developing countries that's paying that, because when you have a loan, you pay back a loan, right? So who's paying it? So that is really a very big challenge. It's a very big challenge for us. And I'm just going to stick to those 2 points, the predictability and accessibility of climate finance. I will not even go into the very difficult area of what is climate finance. So I think Ayman, Peter, and Mohammed have gone into that. So just a comment. We just wanted to make that very clear.
Thank you, Ditas. And it is all very important. Like you've raised very important issues and very important points. And we would love to hear from the experiences from other areas of work related to the convention in terms of those gaps that you've identified, for example, from a more academic standpoint of view in terms of where the provision of climate finance, the trends, some of the trends that you've identified of how the finance is flowing and where are the more specific gaps identified. And also in terms of the lessons learned. There is a lot of work that is going on around the world, and it's very difficult to keep up with everything that is going on. So if you have any particular lessons learned that you want to share with us that are relevant, we only have a couple of minutes left for this breakout group, so it would be very, very interesting to also hear about those. Yes, please, next.
Thank you very much. I think the major gap in my own interpretation is a huge gulf. Climate negotiations have been going on since 1992. And we are seeing that the climate is warming. We're not mitigating the effect of the development of countries that are developed now. And we hear, we read emphasis on country ownership, yet you have lobbyists, you have representatives of international agencies, banks, etc., lobbying governments saying that we know what's better for you, we have money, we can lend you money to do this and that. So there is, in reality, there is no country ownership. Why? Because of this mistrust. We live in a world where the economy goes into cycles, and we see the effect of this on other funds, how they are being replenished, and the amount of replenishment. Now, you want to have a steady state. The steady state can be reached only if developing countries, they have meaningful plans and they are assured that their development ambitions would not be affected by whatever happened to the international economy. There must be a bare minimum threshold that financial flows should not go below this. What if you have an economic crisis, everything will stop in developing countries. So developing countries cannot take seriously the promises made by developed countries. This is a huge gap that needs to be bridged.
Thank you very much. We can take only a couple of very, very short interventions now. I've been told that our time has run out, but I see two pair of hands here, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Hussein Abaza. I'm from Egypt again. Yeah, I think I saw this in the earlier presentation this morning, the word silo. And that's one of, I think, the main issues that we've been struggling with, whether at the international level or at the level of Egypt, where we don't link that much the issue of climate to the development issue, and I think Dr. Omar did mention that. And when we talk about sustainable finance, we don't want to keep on injecting money where countries are not really seeing the link between investing in the climate and its relationship to development and to the SDGs, if I may say so as well. So I think there is so much need in demonstrating the link between investing in the climate change related issues, whether it's adaptation or mitigation, and how it creates jobs, promotes competitiveness, opens up new markets. They need to see the real benefits accruing to countries at the national level from investment. And this is where we need to link very much the issue of climate change and not addressing it in isolation, because that creates a real problem here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Necessarily, we have to create that link. Vicky, the last intervention. I'm really sorry. Sorry.
So yeah, I'm Vicky from Belgium. I wanted to add 2 or 3 points as gaps, but more from my point of view as in in the Flemish government, so not as a negotiator on UNFCCC. I think, I mean, one of the things that we're still struggling with, and I really want to thank the presentation, the scene-setting presentation on that one. I might come back with some questions on that one later. Is to identify the actors on mobilizing finance, which are our partners that actually could help us. Because it's true, within the UNFCCC we have to get public interventions to mobilize, but which public interventions are necessary is already asking for what is necessary for our actors. So that would be step one, and that is one of the issues that we are still looking into. Another issue is that to get more provision of finance and mobilizations, that what is the money used for? We need to have a bit more clarity on this. And I think on the one hand that asks for demand-drivenness and country-drivenness of the recipient countries, but it also requests to have the Paris Agreement and its work program to be developed. I mean, we are a bit working in a in a vacant area, and I mean, for donors, or at least from what we need to do, is to have what is the money used for, what will it deliver, and that is very important that we have this rule book in place, so that is something we can't forget to have. And then you also mentioned the Article 2.1c and a transformational change, and again, I think the presentation shows how important it is to make that step towards that. And that is also another thing that, I mean, it is quite new. We need to convince our own governments, and I mean, maybe I don't think it's just Belgium, but we do have a complex system. It requests some interdepartmental cooperation, which is another gap or a challenge that we have. And it's, I mean, that's also with the sustainable development and making that transition. It can't be not linked with other issues like sustainable development, but it goes much beyond that one. So just a broad, complex financial architecture of climate finance, we should actually use it in making that transformational change. So that would be another issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies for all the other people that wanted to make interventions, but the time has run out. I was told by the Secretariat just now that you will have another opportunity because there is a report back of all of the breakout groups now. So if there are remaining questions or comments to be made on these issues, we will have another opportunity then. So thank you everyone for your active participation in this breakout group, and we'll continue in the report back.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Gosh, oops.
Okay, I think we're going to get started on the report back from the breakout group. So, 안녕하십니까? I am delighted to see you all here today in Songdo. See some familiar faces from the Green Climate Fund board meeting earlier this week. And I'd like to thank those who have missed some significant days at home to be here. I know it's Algerian Independence Day, so thank you very much, Kamal, for being here. And I'd like to join others in thanking the Republic of Korea, Netherlands, and Norway in making this meeting possible, as well as the Standing Committee on Finance Secretariat. So I'd like to welcome the discussion leaders of the breakout groups. So thank you to Sergio, thank you to Lorena, thank you to Raju. We'll start with the first breakout group, and I'd like to invite Lorena to present one sentence that encapsulates and describes the outcome of the breakout group sessions on mobilizing international public finance. So let's see if the word complex makes it again.
Thank you very much. So we reflected upon what was presented in the opening session today, and we had a lively exchange on the guiding questions prepared for the session. So it was a little bit difficult to capture all of that in just one sentence, but we tried our best. And the sentence could be, there is an opportunity to create an effective link between the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement and the broader financial architecture, all of these responding to the real needs in the real world.
Excellent. Would you like to elaborate on that sentence for us, please? Could flesh that out a bit further.
It would be my pleasure. So what we noticed in the exchange is that we had a very interesting ice-breaking presentation. So there is this case study from Finland in which they're actually pushing the boundary a little bit. They're trying to innovate beyond previous efforts and beyond what they've been doing. And immediately, some of the questions raised were about how this relates to the actual process under the UNFCCC and the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And then what are the differences and what are the similarities of this project with previous experiences and with previous projects, particularly noticing the difference there is between actual commitments under the UNFCCC from developed countries and what is the broader scope of the mobilization of finance beyond only public financial resources. So in doing so, there were some questions regarding the risk that countries are willing to take, the risk that companies are willing to take for the implementation of innovative projects, and also what type of investments are there. An important highlight was posed on the real impact and the real effect that these innovative approaches are having, and how that is substantially different from previous experiences. So some of the lessons learned also came into play, and some of the identification of gaps were also briefly touched upon.
Great, thank you very much. Now we'll move to the one sentence encapsulation of session 2, Unlocking Private Finance. So Sergio, take it away. I feel like we're a bit of a K-pop band up here with our microphones.
Okay, in Unlocking Private Finance, Ignacio presented the case of Uruguay, Uruguay has been extremely successful in using reverse auctions as a main tool to achieve their target of 500 megawatts of renewable energy installed capacity, most of it coming from wind capacity. The most important area here, well, the sentence that we selected is, the main topic is unlocking private finance. In order to scale up private investment for climate investors focus on, number one, the country where the project is being implemented. Secondly, they look at the project's financial structure. What are the risks and returns? Who is investing in this project? Is there government support, but not support in terms, more in terms of political and regulation support? And who is implementing the project? Do they have a track record? And lastly, they look at foreign exchange currency and how to hedge some of the extra additional risks. And it's not here, but those extra additional risks is an area where the Green Climate Fund can actually be very, very efficient and effective.
Thank you very much for that summary. I'd like to now invite Raju from the third breakout session group. So Raju, if you'd like to give us that sentence / paragraph / essay.
Thank you very much. We had about 25 people group, very active and very contributing and very fruitful discussion. Of course, it was very difficult for us to capture every discussion that was made, and because this group was to be dealing with country needs and priorities. Well, it's interesting that every countries have their own priorities and needs, and based on their own system how they do this. So that also makes it quite complicated to actually capture that. But in essence, we have tried to put our thoughts there. And thanks to all the group members who contributed in this group 3. We started with a case study presentation from Namo, who is from the African Development Bank, and he shared the case of Zambia on the renewable energy, how his bank and the Green Climate Fund were working together to provide renewable energy, at the same time also reducing carbon emission. And interestingly, what his case also brought up was how it was empowering the local banks and the National Pension Fund, and with the inclusion of the renewable energy, local small-scale stakeholders into the process. So it was quite a insightful case that kicked the discussion. What we, in our group, there were a lot of things, as I said, came up, but precisely that there were challenges in prioritizing needs and of the countries, but at the same time, there were also opportunities that we saw, we looked into, and how these opportunities could be made much stronger with the involvement of various stakeholders that were present in the country. And some of the challenges that I would share that was brought up to in the group was, of course, there's the planning process. Every country has its own planning process, but some of these planning processes are also quite fragmented. Well, they're sector-wise, or they are prioritized based on certain principles. So there was a suggestion how to make this planning process more inclusive and coherent and coordinated, so that it would really benefit the people. At the same time, there was also a suggestion to link into some of the projects and programs that the countries were already preparing. For instance, there was a suggestion how LDCs have prepared National Adaptation Program of Action, but unfortunately, which are yet to be implemented. At the same time, there was a NAP process ongoing, NAMAs were being referred, there was this NDCs being referred. So there was this planning process that the countries are adopting and are moving forward. But at the same time, there was also some challenges that our participants shared, that sometimes this planning process were driven by consultants, which was not very helpful because they did not actually know the local context, or were inclusive into really telling what the local governments or the national governments were really putting into. So there was suggestion how to avoid this so that the local capacity is built, that the national resources are being used to do this actual planning process. And one of the good suggestions also came from was to have probably a kind of a group of or a team of national champions in the country so that they can link up development and climate change together when it moves along, so that identifying the gaps in the country, if there are policy gaps or the strategy gaps in the country, so that it would be done in a very participatory manner, and then in due course, this could be addressed coming from a point looking into, and then once the plans are prepared, then looking into whether resources are available to actually fund these projects or programs in the country. So first, I mean, those strong things, whether we need money first or we need a good, well-inclusive planning process first. So once you have the plan, then we figure out what is the resources that is available at the country level, what are the resources that we mapped, what are the resources that is available at the international level, how much that can be contributed nationally, how much that can be contributed, can come internationally, and if there were other ways of financing these plans and programs in the country. And there was a very, one of the thing was very much prioritized that this entire process has to be very, very inclusive, very gender sensitive, looking into indigenous people's issues and other marginalized communities, people on the ground. So their issues has to be really prioritized so that the actual priority does not miss the sector that the country will have to prioritize. So that was the basis that to sum up our group's discussion.
Thank you very much, Raju. And so you would have heard in all of those summaries a little bit more digging deeper into some of the issues that were raised this morning by Eamon, as well as the presentation by Peter and Mohammed. So we also heard from the summaries that of the complexities and the evolving nature of what is happening both in the international public space, the private sector space, and the work in country to both determine countries' individual needs as well as how to implement climate change activities. So I would invite you all to have a think about any questions that cropped up either during your breakout session, and you may not have had time to pose your questions or comments, or if you had any questions pop up while the summaries were presented, we would welcome your participation. Please also feel free to pose any questions to the case study presenters. So Satu here is sitting, Nacho I think is somewhere in the room as well for you to pose questions to, and Namho from the African Development Bank from the third session case study presentation should be around as well. So while you're all thinking about your question, here we go. Mina, over here, if we could get the mic.
Well, I don't have a question really, but I think I want to be a little bit provocative because we were told that we have to be interactive and provocative and be frank, and I think I want to be frank and have this conversation, because sometimes, you know, in some of these spaces we feel a bit deja vu, especially for those of us who've been going through these meetings for a long time. But very quickly, and forgive me if I slightly exceed the time, because I don't want to take up so much space, but I have just come from the Green Climate Fund meeting, and walking into this room and having this conversation takes me to a little bit of a reality check. And I was sitting in the breakout group 1 about linking the international to the national and talking about developing country needs. And thank you, Raju, for the very good report back about developing countries and their needs. And you identified the NAMAs, the NAPAs, the NAPs, the NDCs, and the Paris Agreement. And so for a while in the past, we were a little bit confused about where we were going. But I think with the Paris Agreement and with the GCF, it seemed to us that the direction was much clearer in terms of where everyone should head, what the objectives should be, and what it would look like. For those of us who were engaged in the creation of the Green Climate Fund, and by the way, This was a fund that many of us pushed because we didn't see the rest of the funds delivering. And so that was why the GCF was, for us, I was one of the first active observers, and I asked this question: is this a fund of hope, or is this a fund of hype? And so, sitting through all these years and coming through the GCF and working out the indicators, the criteria, the paradigm shift potential, what countries need, and all of that is there. And then I ask myself, why is it so hard to talk about a replenishment process? And I, for the life of me, cannot understand that. If we all are heading in a direction, if we are all clear where we need to go, and if this is about making the changes for the people who need it, and that we know, this is old story. The need is the urgency, we all know that. But what is it, this vehicle called the Green Climate Fund, a small part of the climate finance architecture, what is stopping it from really delivering what it ought to deliver? And I know the policy gaps, but for me, I think two words: political will. That, for me, as a CSO observer, when I hear things like, oh, we have to convince our taxpayers, we have to convince our parliaments, the Paris Agreement and the obligations that developing countries have taken on is the commitment that is made. So what more convincing? What does it take? Does it take for all of us to die before money is put? So I think I want to be as provocative as that.
Thank you, Meena. I think you mentioned at the beginning that does raise lots of questions there, but you did mention at the beginning that it wasn't a question. So I think we might think about that for a while and have discussions once we've had a bit of time to consider all of the elements that you just raised. There was a question from the front in the centre here. If you could let us know who you are and where you're from.
Thank you. My name is Jeremiah Sokan. I'm from Liberia. My question will go straight to PPP from the private sector perspective in terms of scaling up or funding climate plans and requests. Countries, developing countries, particularly LDCs, and specifically a country like Liberia, that suffer from the impact of climate change, especially from an adaptation perspective, looking at support, not only sufficient, but sustained. How can, in a practical and pragmatic way, such countries develop a private-public partnership, noting the fact that major private sectors are only most likely have appetite where they think they can get some bottom line and make some money. And adaptation really does not offer too much of a landscape for such opportunity. What do they do? Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I'd open this up for the panel. Maybe Sergio, you would like to go first?
Thank you, Jeremiah. 10 years ago, probably 12 years ago, I was wearing the helmet of the International Finance Corporation, and I was one of the founders of the Global Private Equity Funds group in IFC. One of the challenges the board gave a couple of us, gave us 200 million and asked us to do private equity at the time, not climate, but general private equity investing in the 10 most difficult countries in the world. And they were at the time Liberia, Sierra Leone, Central African Republic, DRC, Bhutan, Nepal, and some others that I don't remember at the time. I was ecstatic to see how the first fund, purely private equity fund, we were able to support it, with some technical assistance, was in Liberia. So I do understand the sentiment and actually the drive of your country. And still, the private equity has done really well. And we were able to mobilize some capital, not a lot, but it was interesting. My point here is that private sector is willing to invest, provided that the structure and the fundamentals of the project are right. And in some of the countries, the SIDS, the Central American, probably the Caribbean, are more difficult because not all the fundamentals are right. But those are the places where GCF has a role to play in de-risking the structures, in taking the first loss, in going out to the private sector and the institutional investors community to tell them, we will be here to really broker your entrance into a private equity fund, into a direct investment, and we will take the first loss. When you go out to the institutional investors community, to a pension fund, to different endowments, they are fully aware of what climate finance is. They may not be quite clear on what adaptation or mitigation is, because they are looking beyond that. They are looking at the project. And what they are saying is, if you can promise me these requirements, and by the way, sometimes they even forsake return, but they want their money back, then they can invest. And this is a role that GCF can take, and we are taking it. I'm part of the private sector facility, PSF. That's our mission. I have been here for about a year. My mission here, I am a private sector fund manager out there. I took a leave of absence, and my idea here is to be able to tell the institutional investors community that this is doable, that GCF is a well-respected institution, that we have private sector and public sector professionals, and that we understand exactly how to invest in a country, whether mitigation or adaptation, and that we can structure projects well to attract institutional investors. I just want to finalize this by saying there are many numbers floating around, but one of the numbers that in the banking community is repeating is $7 trillion are needed to be invested around the world in the next 12, 14 years for us to achieve some of the hopes that we have in Paris, the pledges. Last year, I think CPI quoted 500 billion, 600 billion, 50% was private sector, 50% was public sector. Institutional investors, pension funds, are investing 1% of those 500 billion. Yet, they manage 120 trillion in assets under management. And they want to invest in climate change. But they haven't yet found the partner or the way to come in. And I hope that we can, in GCF, be a partner for these institutional investors. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. We have a question at the back there. If you could let us know who you are and where you hail from, please.
Hello, my name is Tungarai. I come from Nepal. I work with Nepal Federation of Indigenous Nationalities, and I belong to Rai Indigenous Groups of Nepal. I was in Group 2, and we heard a very wonderful story from Uruguay. But also, at the same time, I would also like to flag the reality that we want every community and every actor of the globe should come to act upon the climate crisis, including private sector and other international entities. But also we need to think about the non-carbon cost, non-CO2 cost of our investment and our actions. For example, the cost of your investment to the ecological community, including the biodiversity or the livelihood of the indigenous peoples and the loss of land and resources of indigenous peoples, which are the treasury of our knowledge, of our culture, and of our, the whole identity. We have a big threat, and also, let me say, the potential threat upon this kind of treasury. So when we invite all the actors, have we thought about the non-CO2 cost of such actions, which could be much more expensive than the fossil fuels? So-called renewable energy and clean energy would be much more, dangerous for us for the long term. So I just would like to flag to think about those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. So would anybody in the panel like to respond to that? Or Nacho at the back there, you may want to give us further details on your presentation of the experience in Uruguay with renewable energy. So just Nacho at the back there, please.
Hello, thank you. Well, yeah, we took on this case study earlier before downstairs, trying to see the opportunity for us to, as a general terms, de-risk. We engage our transformation renewable energy from a climate risk perspective. We have a huge important hydro, but on the time of drought, much more of that energy power supply was done through foreign. We had to import oil to generate power. So in this regard, we wanted to move towards a more climate resilient and also less expensive, less riskier power supply. And that's why we did those investments. What we provided there was a very stable government-backed low-risk investment, 10 to 20 years in a stable price. And that allowed us for like around $7 billion in around 8 years to come into our country for us to move back. And to include, right now we have a 96% renewable power supply, around 22% that being wind energy. And we did that by de-risking both our climate risk for our whole country in terms of what were the expense that we had to take on a drought, but also de-risking the private investors in coming in to make those investments for us to speed up that transformation. And actually that's also building on our NDC targets and also in our climate policy as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Nacho. So I might just ask something quickly to the panel here. So we've talked about a great example of a renewable energy project. Just wanted for us to discuss for a moment adaptation. I might just throw to Lorena here and let us know and flesh out some of the discussion that you had in your breakout session on the gaps in the provision of climate finance, particularly on the adaptation space, if you could.
Thank you, Mary, for that question. Yes, the issue of adaptation finance was also raised in our breakout group. There is this acknowledgement of the challenges that many developing countries are facing to actually access resources to implement adaptation actions. And then the question becomes even more relevant when we are addressing the matter of bringing in private funds, private finance, to actually complement or in addition to what the public funds are already doing. And it has been challenging with public funds, so it becomes an even greater challenge to try to picture the whole spectrum of implementation on mitigation, but also adaptation. And particularly because some of the domestic challenges, it was already mentioned in the morning, but some of the domestic systems that are in place are not very well articulated yet. And these present even more challenges for adaptation action, because then the boundaries are even less clear than for other type of actions such as renewable energy in terms of what constitutes adaptation and what constitutes development and what constitutes the public domestic actions and the private sector involvement in those domestic actions, and what are the opportunities for other actors to actually come in and join the equation and bring some additional elements that will enhance the adaptation actions. So that was brought up in our breakout group. We were just engaging in a conversation about that, but also if anyone else that took part on the group would like to come in, I think it would be valuable. But it was recognized as one of the gaps that we're facing, and particularly when you try to link the whole domestic architecture with the international architecture and try to explain the opportunities to the private actors as well.
Yeah. A lot in there. And Raju, would you like to
Well,
come
I
in?
just wanted to add to what you just mentioned. Actually, when any particular disaster really hits, well, it's just not a particular that event that is only of the issue. Because I would like to give the example of, let's say, a flood. When a flood hits, and it hits every year or very frequently, then it's just not the communities or the agriculture field or the livelihoods of the people being impacted. But it brings a whole set of problems because it is a problem with the health issues, there is a problem with schooling, there's a problem with drinking water, there's a problem with the issue with the infrastructure being taken away. So I think when you look the adaptation perspective, that it has to be also very holistic. So I don't want to get to the debate about this adaptation or development, but what I would like to see from my own experience is that when you're looking at designing adaptation project, we'll have to be very specific to the impact, that how far-reaching is the impact. Because if you do not consider, then there is a whole lot of section of population who would be directly or indirectly be affected. Well, I mean, in this particular case, like there was a very good example shared by Sumaya. I found it quite interesting that they have a program called Zero Thirsty program in Sudan, and they would like to address the drought issues with that. And their baseline was that the communities would not have to walk more than 2 kilometers. Look at that, 2 kilometers. And then if you have to walk, if that's the baseline, then we can imagine the degree of problem in that. So in that case, what happens when those events are there, it also distorts in terms of participation if you want to do something particularly. If you want to, the target group may not be reachable. So whole things get distorted. So it has to be seen from a holistic perspective.
Thank you, Raju. Would I invite anybody from the floor to either ask further questions or details? A comment.
Perhaps to the GCF representative, because on private sector facility, when we were designing the Green Climate Fund, one of the things that we were very, very aware of is that there are all sorts of private sector. And if you look at the governing instrument in the private sector facility, actually we wanted to focus our attention on local private actors. Because for developing countries like mine, like I said, like the largest private sector are the jeepney drivers. We're not expecting them to invest, but they are, of course, also victims of climate change. The first victim of climate, when it rains more on the private sector than on the public sector. I mean, everything that they're affected, peasants, farmers, and all of that. And so the focus is not really getting money. The idea that we had in the Green Climate Fund is for the private sector to be involved, not as a source of revenue for the fund, but is in the way in which when the fund is implemented, when project is implemented, private sector is, of course, as always, very much involved in the implementation in that manner. It's not, we must not, we must get rid of the idea that private sector or multilateral private sectors that will then invest in your country and so forth. That is not the idea at all, and if you read, of course, the governing instrument, that's it. On adaptation, if you look at the objective of the fund, there are two things. They're always saying paradigm shift, okay? Paradigm shift, but they forget the first phrase in that sentence. I think it's paragraph 3 of the governing instrument. In the context of sustainable development, that's where you're going to do the paradigm shift. And at the end of it, it says, taking into account needs and priorities of developing country most vulnerable to the climate change. The way that it was truncated, the objective of the Green Climate Fund makes it look as if what we're looking at is a paradigm shift. We forget that it's in the context of sustainable development. Why? Because this is climate change. We have to develop in a way that will not exacerbate the problem of climate change and change from the usual development paths into. So I find this whole debate about, is this development, is this mitigation, is this adaptation, is this climate relevant? They're asking that irrelevant question in the Green Climate Fund. Of course, it's a Green Climate Fund, so, you know, what is relevant? But I just want to make very sure those two things. When we talk private sector, let us open our minds. We know that there are all sorts of private sector. It's not just the source of money that they're going to put money into and then, in fact, we thought it was the other way around. And also that adaptation and development are one and the same thing, because that is what we are talking about here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ditas. I know that we do have a few Green Climate Fund experts in the room. So we've got, just be in the row behind you, we have some experts there on the board, and we have some Secretariat, Green Climate Fund Secretariat staff. Sergio, he's one walking in now, as I hear. Sergio here, as well as Eduardo, Dan, and Juan. They're your Green Climate Fund experts. Liana, who's been involved in the Green Climate Fund for a long time, as well as Mina.
Next to Eduardo is Naun too. I can see her
there
from
she
the
is.
GCF.
Yeah. So at lunchtime, please feel free to take the opportunity to tap into their expertise and experience. I know that we're going into our lunchtime, so I don't want to do that. So we'll take two more, and then we'll try to get you done and off to lunch by 12:51 p.m. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Edgar Cruz from Colombia, the National Planning Department. My question and my reflection is, when we are talking about mobilizing finance and different sources and different types of concessionality, is the issue of debt. Because we are, for example, structuring a portfolio of projects. And when we come to our colleagues of Finance Ministry, and for projects related with adaptation, we find, for example, fiscal rules. Oh, we cannot increase the debt ceiling. Oh, yeah, we cannot move that. We don't have the fiscal space for this. And we said, okay, but yeah, how to engage that this is, we understand that this is something beneficial, that this will generate all sort of co-benefits, but still the question is, okay, if part of the stream of finance is gonna come through debt, as is an instrument that is managed by the GCF, and even there is a discussion on that the debt should be sustainable, but we know, and if we surpass, if we move beyond tipping points, that we will have larger needs. How to make sure that we balance the books? How to make sure that this is something sustainable for the financial systems to take? because these are the big questions when you are at the national sector, dealing with the budget, dealing how to plan the budget, or if you are engaging with private sector on how to make a long-term vision. And that is a call to think carefully on the real concessionality that is needed for all these funds, because at some moments, of course, we need partners that come when the markets are mature, when you have really established business models, but there are many things that will have really strong requirements on concessionality. If not, they are not going to work. And this is a message on how are we going to ensure that the finance is mobilized in such a way that is also not an extra financial burden for developing countries. And that is a point that, okay, I don't know if you have in the panelists some reflection on that. Thank you.
Okay, so I might ask the panel to think about their response, but I also invite participants from the floor to share experiences from in-country or other experiences, and then we'll finish up. I'm getting time signals from the Secretariat. Okay, anybody from the panel in particular would like to respond to the last question?
No, I think the point that Edgar makes is very well noted and understood, especially coming from a country like Colombia that is very disciplined about finances, and I understand the rigidity sometimes of the local budgets and vis-a-vis all the investment and sustainability that needs to be made in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation. There is not a magic word, and you know, some countries have more flexibility than others, as Edgar said. In the private sector, we're very mindful of that, and we try to the extent possible to use concessionality in a very serious way, primarily because we don't have that many resources either. And the way that we do it is by, first of all, de-risking the projects, and also mobilizing institutional and private investors into the project, for which we will take more risk than any other investors. So mobilization is part of the answer. Logically, as one of the gentle lady was saying, how important was to act locally. Some local markets have more institutional monies than others, but that's the answer, is to go local and ensure that these institutional investors are committed to the projects in their own country, for which we can take more risk than anyone else. So that's part of the answer, but it's probably not the silver bullet, because it's a big problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other concluding remarks from the panelists? Lorena?
Thank you. It seems to me that this brings us back to the original issue at hand in our group, in terms of how we have different national circumstances and realities. Correct. And the legal framework is one that we should bear in mind, the fiscal incentives that each country decides for itself, and how to make a link or a connection between this climate finance narrative that we're using more constantly every time, and the larger financial architecture in terms of creating a balance for the needs and also for the objectives of each country. I think in the Latin American region, it's very clear that we have different incentives in different countries, and sometimes we don't even manage to share within our own region some of the opportunities that we've identified, or some of the experiences that were successful. We tend to focus more often in the challenges and the barriers and all of those gaps that remain to be addressed. And we should try to also get our minds together in terms of how we create those spaces in which we can learn from each other, and also understanding that there are domestic circumstances that are unique to each country.
Thank you. Raju?
I don't know if it actually links to the question that was asked, but I just wanted to relay this also message from our group members. Actually, we didn't discuss this in the group because we had very limited time, but as we were working out of the room, some of the members from the group said that developing countries are extremely, working hard to come out with good policies that is integrated with their development plans and policies. And they have also figured out where the resources lie if they want to access climate funding to take some of these projects into the grounds. But what they have really noted is the process of accessing these international funds has been extremely complicated. It's very difficult to tell their finance ministries, or if it is an NDA or a focal point of certain funds, to tell them that, well, this is something we can access to do our climate projects because of the procedures and the requirements that they have to fulfill. So there is a tendency with these complications that, well, whether they should really rely on these funds or should they go somewhere else to look for this, to implement those plans. And for instance, there was also a very interesting case given that when the project is developed, they were asked, how much co-finance can we really have put in so that we can take this fund to to certain to funds or to donors? And some of them were even asked, like, can you do it by yourself first? And if you cannot, then we will maybe try and help you that. Or like, can you take it in a soft loan context? Mm-hmm. So all those questions are being asked to them before actually they can think of that. So I think I just wanted to relay that, for many of the developing countries, this has been especially very low capacity countries, has been an extremely complicated aspect as well.
Thank you. So I think we've heard today that to enhance the mobilization of both private and public finance to meet the needs and priorities of developing countries, we need to keep in mind the complex and evolving nature of the climate finance architecture, as well as the country-specific circumstances. Lorena also mentioned the need to share experiences and lessons learned, and I invite you to do that when we go to lunch. So thank you all for your participation. I'd like to now just welcome Lando for some housekeeping messages and wish you a delicious lunch. 맛있게 드세요.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a few housekeeping. I think it's already there. Lunch will be served at the 3rd floor of Sheraton. So when you leave this place, there will be local staff to guide you to Sheraton. And for those funded participants, DSA will be available from 1:30 onwards. It's at room 202. At the very end of this corridor. And we will reconvene at 2 o'clock for 2 plenary discussions, followed by a breakout group. Thank you, and enjoy your lunch.